Hello and welcome back to Plant Life Cycles. Today we're going to talk about the specific parts of plant lives, such as germination, flower production, seed production, dormancy, and even how plants change colors in the fall. This is a diagram to show a plant life cycle, with an example of a tomato. Inside tomatoes there are seeds. That seed can be planted, a seedling will develop, that seedling will develop into a mature plant, which will flower. Honeybees will help pollinate that plant, and it will eventually grow into a fruit, which has seeds inside, and the cycle can continue. We're going to go over each of these steps: germination, juvenility, maturity, senescence, and dormancy. Plant life starts with germination. Germination starts when a seed absorbs water. That softens the seed coat and initiates biological processes inside the seed that get the plant ready to start growing. After the seed coat is softened and the biological processes start initiating, the radicle is first appeared. Then the cotyledons, or the little leaves that are inside of the seed, start to come up. These are the cotyledons. Those act as the first leaves of the plant to start photosynthesizing. The roots emerge into the soil and start gathering nutrients and water. For the first part of the plant's life, it isn't photosynthesizing, such as in this stage, and the plant relies on all the nutrients in the seed that the mother plant gave it. As the plant develops, eventually more leaves will be produced and it will become self-sufficient or independent, and then the stage of germination is over. It enters the stage of being a juvenile plant or an immature plant. Juvenility is when the plant grows rapidly but does not begin to reproduce. It does not begin to produce flowers. Once the plant is mature, sexual reproduction takes place, which means the production of flowers. How does the plant know when the right time to flower is? How does it know that it's old enough or it's a good season to start producing flowers? The plant doesn't really know what time it is or even the date, but what it does notice is the environmental conditions around it, such as temperature and night length. With just these two indicators, the plant can decide when the right time to flower is. Isn't that amazing that the plant knows when to flower, when the right time is to be most successful to produce fruits and viable seeds, to produce seeds for the next generation? Talk about amazing engineering by God. Let's talk about how these mechanisms work. In nature, there are different seasons, and those seasons have different night lengths and different temperatures, so the plant can measure these and decide when to flower. People can also simulate these conditions to induce flowering when you want that plant to flower. Why would you want to do this? Well, at certain times of the year, different plants are worth more money. For example, around the Valentine's Day holiday, roses are much more expensive, so it would be an economic benefit to you if all your roses flowered at that time of year. Or lilies are very expensive or popular around Easter season, and poinsettias are very popular around the Christmas season. So different times of year, different flowers are wanted or demanded by the economy. First, we're going to talk about the role of cold in the process of plants deciding when to flower. So cold temperature is a crucial environmental factor that causes flowering of many plants. Some plants from northern climates die or never flower if they're grown in hot places. That's because they don't get enough time that's cold. This time that's cold that they need is called vernalization. They need to be vernalized, which means subject to cold temperatures, before they can grow successfully and then flower. For example, did you ever wonder how the biennial plant, example carrot, did not flower the first year? It actually required this cold time or vernalization before it could flower in the following spring. So plants have this built-in system that does not allow them to flower unless certain environmental conditions occur. Let's talk about how vernalization actually happens and why it's important. Let's do an example of an apple tree. Apple trees require a vernalization period, or a time of cold, before they can produce flowers. That's because where apple trees grow usually have 4 seasons. If the fall season is very warm, and the apple trees did not have this vernalization system in place, they would produce flowers which would then be killed by the frost or the cold of winter. So the plant would have wasted a lot of energy producing flowers that just died. So they require this vernalization period. How does this vernalization period work? Well, all things that organisms do, including plants, are written into the organism's DNA. The DNA can be thought of as the directions of how to grow. There's DNA in the plant that describes the process of making a flower. Without vernalization, the plant cannot access this section of DNA. So it literally doesn't know how to produce a flower unless it goes through this cold time. We're going to use this cartoon to demonstrate this. A lot of times in the winter time is a great time to spend time indoors reading books. Books give us ideas on future adventures and explain to us how to do certain things. Think of it this way. If the apple tree does not have a cold period, it does not have time to go into dormancy or rest. If it doesn't have this rest, it won't have the energy to read or ability to read the directions of how to produce a flower. So without this cold period, you cannot read the directions of how to do cool things, and apple trees cannot read the DNA giving instructions on how to produce apple flowers. Once the apple produces flowers, it can then do something very exciting, produce an apple. This example that we just went over is not only for apple trees, it's also for peaches, cherries, plums, pears, pecans, grapes, and citrus. Each of these types of fruit trees requires a certain amount of hours of cold before they can read the section in their DNA on how to produce a flower. So this is how many hours they need of cold, how many hours of reading they need to be able to produce flowers. We're going to go through an example. On the left side is the crop, and then is the cultivars, and then the chill hour requirement. So all these numbers refer to the amount of hours each of these cultivars need before it can read the directions of how to produce a flower. Let's go over what happens if the plant does not get enough chill hours. We'll go through an example of peach varieties. There's 3 different types of peach varieties that we'll go over: Early Grande, June Gold, and Red Haven. For these 3 cultivars, let's go over what happens if you plant the fruit tree in the wrong chill hour zone. So there's maps for different areas of the world that shows how many chill hours on average you'll get in that region. For example, Brownsville, Texas gets 200 hours of chill. In College Station, there's around 600 hours of chill. In Wichita Falls, there's 1,000 hours of chill. For our first example, if you plant an Early Grande peach variety, it requires 250 chill hours. If you plant it in Brownsville, Texas, there'll be 200 hours of chill. What do you think happens? Because there's 200 hours and it requires 250, most years it will have normal flowering. What if you plant that same plant, the Early Grande, in College Station, Texas, where you get 600 hours? Well, after 250 hours of chill, the plant will initiate flowering. So the flowers will start too early in the spring and then likely be killed by the late frost. Same goes for if there's 1,000 hours. The flowers will be produced very early in the spring and it will be definitely killed by the frost. Now that you understand this, pause this video and see if you can decide what will happen if there's this June Gold variety, which needs 650 hours, what will happen if it's planted in a zone of 200 hours. What did you come up with? If you said that it would flower late, if at all, you're correct. Because there's only 200 hours of cold, it will not have time to read that section of the DNA required for developing a peach flower. If it's planted in College Station, however, what do you think? Yes, it will have normal flowering. If it's grown in Wichita Falls, it will flower very early in the spring and likely be killed by a late frost. Please pause the video and fill in what's going to happen for Red Haven. I hope that you said if it's grown in Brownsville, Texas, that it will flower very late, if at all, and the plant would just continue growing vegetatively. If grown in College Station, it would flower very late also, if at all, but still grow vegetatively. And if it's grown in Wichita Falls, it's going to have normal flowering and normal fruit production. Understanding these chill hours and looking up what type of chill hour requirements your plant has with what chill hours you have in your region is very important, or else you might buy the wrong fruit tree. Buying fruit trees and planting them is a huge investment because it usually takes quite a few years, usually around 3, before the fruit tree is producing fruit. And if you've made that investment, taking care of that tree for those 3 years, and then you planted it in the wrong zone, you've made a very bad economic decision. So understanding this is very important for making good horticulture decisions. Now that you understand vernalization, I'm going to introduce another way that plants know when to flower, and that is night duration. Some plants are responsive to the changes in the night length, and these plants are called photoperiodic. Some plants flower when the days are short, and some plants flower when the days are long. It's important that gardeners understand this and know which plants are which so that they can have beautiful flowers all year round. Originally, the researchers thought that the length of the daytime was really important for when plants flower. But as they did more research, they realized that it's actually the length of night, or dark, that triggers plants to flower. I'm going to explain how this works. Short day plants flower only when the daylight period is less than their critical photoperiod, for example, 12 hours. Long day plants will flower only if the light period is more than their critical photoperiod. Let's go through this example so that you understand. This is a graph showing how much light, shown in yellow, and how much dark, shown in gray, the plant gets, and when the plant flowers. So first we're going to go through short day plants, which should be called long night plants, so that you can see this plant, when it gets a lot of light, it will not flower because it needs short days and long nights. So again, long day plants, short day plants. So if the days are short, the nights are then long. So what happens if the day gets shorter? The amount of light gets less. They will then flower. So plants have this critical period, this amount of hours, and you can do research on specific plants to figure out that exact hours. And then you can modify the amount of light that plant gets so that it will flower. Again, horticulturists do this to produce flowers at a certain time of year when they're worth more. What happens if that long night is interrupted by, say, a couple hours of light? That plant will not flower. So you can see that even just a little bit of light during the night will ruin the ability of that plant to flower. This is really important when you're managing a greenhouse that you don't have the lights come on too long. Now let's talk about long day plants. If the days are long and the nights are short, long day plants will produce flowers. If the days are short and the nights are long, they will not produce flowers. But you can manipulate long day plants into thinking their nights are shorter by having this break. So if you have some light and then a short night and then a little bit more light, just a couple hours, and then more night, you can trick long day plants into flowering. The way that night lengths triggers flowering involves a pigment called phytochrome. It alternates between two forms, each with a sensitivity to different wavelengths of light in the red to far red range. So phytochrome is the way that night triggers flowering. So now that we've covered vernalization and night length, we're going to talk about the last way that affects when plants know when to flower, and that's light intensity. Light intensity can also control flowering. Oftentimes, plants that are day neutral, meaning that they're not short day or long day plants, for these plants, greater light intensity is required to induce flowering than is required to have the plant continue to grow vegetatively. These plants can give people some trouble. Have you ever bought a beautiful flower, maybe from the grocery store or a plant store, brought it home, and then never have it flower again? That's because this plant might need a certain light intensity to flower. It happens to many household plants, bought for their blooms, but they never flower again because they're being moved from a greenhouse where you bought it to indoors. At your house, there might not be as intense of light as the plant needs. The light intensity of most homes is simply too low to induce flowering of these plants. Now that we've covered how plants know when to flower, let's talk about what happens when the plant does flower. After the plant flowers, pollination will occur, usually assisted by pollinators such as honeybees. Within the ovule of the plant, such as an angiosperm, a 1N gamete and a 1N female gamete unite to form a 2N zygote, which eventually matures to form a seed. So 1N from the male plant parts and 1N from the female plant parts form a 2N zygote. Sometimes, after pollination, some of the flower components of the flower will wither and drop off. The ovary with its newly fertilized egg continues to develop, however. Let's go through a few examples. So this tomato flower opens, and then, after pollination, you'll see that the petals shrivel up and die and fall off, but the ovary is still maturing, and photosynthates, sugars produced in photosynthesis, are pumping this to become a fruit. Same thing with strawberry. You can see the development of the fruit over time, and in a melon. Sugars photosynthesized in the leaf constantly flow into the fruit. Fruit production is expensive for a plant, supplying energy to the developing ovary, which will become the fruit. When the fruit reaches the end of its enlargement period, ripening begins. This is caused by the production by the plant of ethylene gas, a hormone produced by the fruit. The fruit will then become more soft, possibly change colors, and flavor can change from sour to sweet. These pictures are to show you that the ovary of a plant really do truly develop into a fruit. You can see that the anatomy is quite similar. You can see that the seeds are visible in the flowers and the fruits, and the shape is the same. Example of an apple and example of a tomato. You can see the exact same shape. The little butt of a tomato is actually the leftover parts of the stigma. And the leaves are the sepals on the flower. The shape of the ovary determines the fruit structure. So fertilization of the egg starts fruit development. Then the ovary wall develops and differentiates into the fruit wall. So ovary wall develops into the fruit wall. This fruit wall is called the pericarp. The pericarp has three main sections: the exocarp, the mesocarp, and the endocarp. The exocarp is the outside, the mesocarp is the middle, the endocarp is the inside. Inside is the seed, which has structure as well. Let's talk about seed anatomy. Inside we have the seed. On the outside we have the pericarp. Again, we have the exocarp, the mesocarp, and the endocarp. And then inside we have the seed. We have the endosperm, the embryo, which is the newly forming plant, and the seed coat. Further into seed parts. Seed parts are different in dicots versus monocots, but they have the main parts. Embryo, which is the young multicellular organism before it emerges from the seed. The endosperm, which is the source of stored food, consisting primarily of starches for the plant before it becomes photosynthesizing independently, and the seed coat, which consists of one or more protective layers that encases the seed. Now let's talk about fruit classification. As you know, there's a lot of different types of fruit. Some of them look similar, And so some of these classifications will make sense to you. Others will be a little bit new, and you might be surprised. Fruit are classified based on appearance of the fruit tissue, primarily if the fruit is fleshy or dry. Fleshy fruits are those that contain appreciable or a lot of water. Most of our eating fruits are fleshy fruits, such as plums, strawberries, and oranges. Dry fruits include sunflowers, pecans, and other things that you would usually think of as nuts. They have very little water inside. Again, fleshy fruits have lots of water inside, and examples are plums, strawberries, oranges, and most vegetables from which the fruit is eaten, cucumbers, squash, and eggplants. Anything that develops from an ovary of a flower is a fruit. So a lot of the things that you think of as vegetables, botanically, are actually fruits. Fleshy fruits are classified by the position of the seed relative to the fruit. For example, drupe fruits have a fleshy exterior and a single seed encased in a hard covering. Pome fruits mature from a multi-seed ovary, and berries have one or more seeds in a soft, fleshy covering. Let's go through examples of these three. You'll need to know the difference between drupe, pome, and berry. A drupe example are peaches and plums. Again, we have this fleshy exterior with a single seed encased in a hard covering, a peach or a plum. Pomes fruits mature from a multi-seed ovary, such as apples and pears, multiple seeds in the ovary. Berries, on the other hand, have multiple seeds in this soft, fleshy covering. Multiple seeds, all this fleshy covering. A grape is technically a berry, as is a tomato. Raspberries and blackberries are also berries. It might seem a little weird that grapes are technically berries, but botanically they are. The achene classification can be fleshy fruits or dried fruits. For example, the seeds are born outside of this juicy flesh. Just like in a strawberry, you see the seeds all on the outside. A dandelion and these helicopter or semines from a maple tree are also achenes. Now let's talk about the classification of dry fruits. Again, dry fruits include sunflowers, pecans, and other fruits that contain very little water. Some dry fruits split and release the seeds at maturity. The ones that split open to release the seeds are called dehiscent, and the ones that do not split are called indehiscent. Let's go over a dehiscent dry fruit. Legumes or pods that contain one locule that splits along the structure, such as a peanut that can split open to release the seeds. An example of a follicule are sweet gum fruits. These contain one or more locules, and these can split open among these different lines. A capsule contains 3 or more locules that split along 3 or more of these spaces. This is an example of a golden rain tree fruit, split open. For the dry, indehiscent fruits that do not split at maturity, the examples are samaras, which come from maple trees, grains, such as wheat or corn. Achenes, which we covered, are like strawberries. An example is a sunflower, so you can see all the seeds at the outside of the ovary, just like in a strawberry, and these seeds can be harvested. But again, they are indehiscent, which means they do not split open to let that sunflower seed at maturity. That's why you have to crack them open individually. And then for our last examples, we have nuts such as pecans. Now that we've covered the classifications for fruit, let's talk about maturity. Sometimes when fruits are maturing, they can overripe. If the fruit becomes overripe, it can often become mushy and unedible. This is called post-harvest loss. After you harvest the fruit, it can become overripe and not edible. This is a really big problem around the world, and it reduces the food supply and adds to food waste. So softening of fruits is the result of breaking down of the compounds called pectin substances, which make up the fruit wall. These pectin strengthen the cell walls and cement the cells together. But when these pectin substances start breaking down, the fruit becomes mushy. In overripening, mushiness occurs because too much pectin substances have been lost and broke down. As the pectin breaks down a little bit, the fruit becomes more sweet, but if it's too much, it becomes mushy. Color changes also happen in fruit maturing and ripening. This is because the breakdown of chlorophyll and the accumulation of other pigments inside the fruit. Chlorophyll decreases and other pigments increase the intensity of the color. Carotene is a pigment that gives orange-color fruits such as oranges and persimmons. Anthocyanin is the pigment responsible for the red color in ripe strawberries and apples. These two pigments are also responsible for the colors that you see in fall leaves. Now that we've talked about fruit production and fruit ripening, we're going to go on to our next stage, which is plant death, or senescence. Senescence is aging of a plant or any of its parts. It's a natural part of the life cycle of the plant. For annual plants, they completely die at the end of the season. This senescence is natural and a part of their life cycle. But senescence can also occur as a result from an environmental condition that hurt the plant or a disease. Senescence is characterized by dramatic changes in metabolism. For example, the cellular respiration of the plant increases and the rate of photosynthesis decreases. And there's breakdown of large molecules into smaller ones, such as fat, proteins, or carbohydrates. In the fall time, herbaceous perennials will die back. It looks like the whole plant is dead, but underneath in the roots there is living parts of the plant. In the early springtime, you'll see this new growth, and this herbaceous perennial will continue its growth. In this case, the senescence was only in the top portion of this herbaceous perennial. This also happens to bulbs annually, but the root system of these plants remains alive. In the fall, deciduous tree leaves senesce. This causes beautiful fall colors. It's signaled by the shortening of days in the fall and cooler temperatures. Next, I want you to watch this video, which explains why trees turn colors in the fall. After you watch this video, you'll return to this video, and I will give you 6 questions to answer about the video you just watched. You'll find this link to the video in the description of this video below. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now, to make sure that you fully understand the points that the video made, you'll need to go over these questions with your partner or on your own. Fall colors are a result of this amazing recycling system that plants have. What trees lose their leaves? Why do they do this? What pigment, important for photosynthesis, is broken down? With no photosynthesis happening, this absorbed energy can cause havoc. What molecule absorbs this energy and becomes dangerously reactive when energized? How does anthocyanin help with this process? In this process, trees can recover what % of the nitrogen and phosphorus from their old leaves to help grow new ones in the spring? What % is recovered? Our next subject is dormancy. Dormancy, or rest, is a stage of plant development in which growth slows or stops, and it affects all life stages from seed to maturity. Dormancy is an important plant adaptation that allows plants to survive harsh growing conditions and ensure survival. Dormancy occurs during periods that are not suitable for plant growth and is usually seasonally related, such as a dry season, commonly in California or Texas. Winter dormancy also happens in areas that get to very cold temperatures in the winter. While photosynthesis can happen at temperatures below freezing, the dry winter air can cause plant damage or death, especially if the groundwater is frozen and unavailable. If there's no water, plants cannot do photosynthesis. Plants like evergreen trees can photosynthesize during the winter. That's because they have limited surface area on their leaves, which are really just pine needles, and that is an adaptation to help them minimize water loss. Plants are also in dormancy when they are seeds. Seeds are dormant, and specific conditions are needed to break that dormancy and initiate germination. Seed dormancy allows seeds to be stored for many years and then be planted. This seed dormancy ensures seedling survival because The plant only wants to germinate if conditions are right for its growth, or else the seed would germinate and the plant would die. When you germinate a sunflower seed, how do you do it? What is required for germination of a sunflower seed? If you said water and warmth, you're correct. That's all you need to germinate a sunflower seed. Put a sunflower seed in a damp paper towel, into a little plastic baggie, and into a semi-warm area, and it will germinate. If you broke open an apple and took out these little apple seeds and put in a sunflower seeds and put the apple back together and stored it in a semi-warm room, do you think that seed would germinate? A sunflower seed would actually germinate in that condition. But why aren't these apple seeds germinating in this condition? Well, if this apple seeds did germinate in this condition, you'd see apple trees full of little apple seedlings. It would look ridiculous, and very few of those apple seedlings would grow. That's why apple seeds have this built-in system that will not allow them to germinate unless they've gone through a period of cold. That ensures that apple seeds that became mature in the fall do not germinate until the following spring. Seeds have built-in dormancy so that they do not germinate at the wrong time. We're going to go through 4 examples of seed dormancy and how nature breaks that. The first example has to do with cold. Some seeds require stratification, which means that they have to go through a period of cold before they'll germinate. This is very important because if this mechanism was not built in, this dormancy was not built into the seeds, they would germinate in the fall and then have to deal with a very harsh winter early on in their life. The plant would then die. So it's very important that trees, such as apple trees, have this stratification requirement before they'll germinate. Some seeds have a very strong seed coat, and they require to be roughed up, or abrasion needs to happen on that seed before it'll germinate. This can happen by the seed falling into a river and being hit by rocks over time, and then the seed can germinate after it gets onto the shore. Or it can happen by wind abrasion, so anything breaking up that seed coat over time. Some seeds require very harsh conditions, such as a forest fire, in order to initiate germination. This is really common in pine forests. Other seeds need chemical treatment, such as going through the gut of a bird. The 4 that we went over is stratification, heat, scarification, damaging the seed coat, and chemical scarification, using chemicals to damage the seed coat. In nature, scarification is going through a winter period, but horticulturists can do this by storing moist seeds at temperatures near freezing for a few months. Peaches and apple trees are stratified before planting. Only intense forest fire heat will weaken the seed coat of some pine seeds that are woody and thick. But most seeds require less dramatic measures to break dormancy than a forest fire. Scarification means that the seed coat needs to be eroded enough, or broken, or damaged enough by weather to permit germination, or by falling into a river. It can also be weathered artificially by scarification. You can simply cut or scratch the seed and injure the seed coat enough to allow water to absorb into the seed and initiate germination. You want to be careful when you're scarifying a seed to not damage the embryo of the plant, because then germination will not occur. Chemical scarification can happen and weaken the seed coat, such as going through the digestive system of a bird. Acid in the stomach eats away at the seed coat, and the seed is deposited along with the feces of the animal. Then the seed has a built-in fertilizer to initiate germination. That's our last example of seed dormancy. Let's review. Today we talked about a lot of exciting parts of the plant life cycle, such as germination, how the plant knows when to flower, and how senescence occurs and how important that is. We also talked about seed dormancy. These questions are designed to help you review what we've covered today. You can go over them on your own or with your partner. What's the importance of seed dormancy? Why is it important for the plant to regulate when to flower? How does it do that? We went over a few different ways. How can we modify these conditions to make plants flower when we want them to? And why would you want to do that? How does plant senescence happen and why? I hope you enjoyed today's topic. I'll see you next time.